Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park and have been made possible in part by Ravinia Festival, CJE, Senior Life, GAN Music and Sound.
Hi, welcome to another edition of What's This Show For? FOR, Friends of Ron. I'm your host, Ron Levitsky. Mayor Rudy Giuliani once wrote, "What children need most are the essentials that grandparents provide in abundance. They give unconditional love, kindness, patience, humor, comfort, and lessons in life, and most importantly, cookies." Well, I'm sure we have a lot of people out there who are grandparents who would agree. Grandparenting is a blessing, and it seems so natural. It's part of the life cycle. But did you ever wonder, is there any way I could be a better grandparent? Well, if you've ever wondered that, we've got some answers for you today with our delightful guest, the author of the book, The Grandest Love, Jerry Witkovsky. Jerry, welcome to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, when we talked earlier, I was really impressed with your career, which certainly well prepared you to do the book that you did. So let's start a little bit about your background. Where were you born? Where were you raised?
I was born in Chicago in 1928. I lived on the South Side, and I went to Harper High School in Englewood, and that's where my life started, and that's where I began.
And you were in the Army?
Yes, after graduating high school, my parents could never send me to college, afford to send me to college. So I joined the Army. I was in the service for 18 months, and 9 of those months were spent in Japan. And
that was after the war?
After the war. It was 1946 when I went in, when I graduated high school.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you were able to use the GI Bill, I take it?
I used the GI Bill to go to George Williams College, which was located then in Hyde Park. And met my wife there, and my to-be wife, and we got married in my senior year. And after I graduated, I received a scholarship from the Jewish Community Centers to get a master's degree in social work.
Okay, and I was struck because when I think of social work, I don't know why, but when I think of it, I often think of sitting down one-on-one with somebody and helping the person. But your specialty was not so much working with individuals, was it?
No, my specialty was in group work, and the school of social work was at Navy Pier at that time, and so that's where I studied, and I studied group work because that was my passion. When I was 16, I worked at the Chicago Boys Club camp in Indiana, and I fell in love with camping. I wanted to do that all my life.
Yeah, when we talked earlier, you said something that really resonated with me. You said, quote, "Camping is a sacred trust."
That's
right.
right.
I don't know many people feel that way, so can you explain that a little bit? That's fascinating.
Well, at camp, you have the children for 3 weeks or for a month, and sometimes in some camps for the whole summer, so that you have an opportunity to expose them to all kinds of ideas and social skills, so that you learn how to deal with bullying if that exists in your cabin, or how to care about each other, how to teach each other, and how to learn new skills like arts and crafts or swimming or canoeing, all kinds of things. And that to me is a sacred trust. How do you train your staff, who are usually 19 and 20-year-olds, to achieve that goal? And I just love that experience.
And I understand that in an age when lots of people jump around from job to job, you sort of stuck with one organization for quite a while, didn't you?
I worked for the Jewish Community Centers for 47 years. I started as a part-time worker, and then I became a teenage worker in Albany Park, and then just progressed to the director of Camp Chi, our resident camp, and also from there as assistant general director, and then the last 18 years of my career as the general director of the Jewish Community Centers.
So just real briefly, what is the JCC? What is the Jewish Community Center?
Jewish Community Center is located throughout the metropolitan area. We have centers throughout the area in the southern suburbs. And in the centers we have nursery schools, teenage programs, senior adult programs, theater programs. It's a place where you learn a lot of skills and develop relationships with people.
So it sounds like it's social and cultural?
And educational.
Educational.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you mentioned that you worked for a while as a camp counselor, and then you were in charge of the camp.
In charge of Camp Chi, yes.
Okay. And then what did you do for the J then after you left, if you didn't work directly for the camp?
I became the assistant general director of the Jewish Community Centers. And then when my boss retired, I became the general director in 1980.
And I was struck that you mentioned that you had a specific kind of philosophy as your leadership style, and you called it a culture of teaching and learning. What did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that when I first became general director, I felt I had to do everything myself. And then I realized that I could never do everything myself. So what I did was to talk to my staff, and when you're the supervisor or the boss, everybody knows you're the boss, everybody knows you're the supervisor. And supervision to me is teaching and learning. And I decided I want to learn from my staff. I wanted them to teach me. I didn't know everything, obviously, so that I created the culture of I teach you, you teach me. You help me grow as a professional, I help you grow as a professional. And for those people that didn't want to be a part of that kind of culture, then I suggested that they go someplace else to work. But I wanted them to be committed to my learning as well as my committed to their learning.
It sounds like a very wise and sort of a healthy atmosphere. I would think people would enjoy going to work knowing that their thoughts, their ideas were valued.
Yes, one of my staff said, "You mean I can tell you what you're doing wrong?" I said, "Absolutely. Teach me, teach me."
That's very healthy, which of course comes up in your book. Now, you worked at the J for a long time, and my understanding is that even when you worked at camp, you were thinking about the importance of grandparents' relationship to the campers, the grandchildren. And didn't you do some special activities with grandparents?
Yes, I created about 35 years ago a weekend in early June that was the Grandparent-Grandchild weekend. It was sacred time for grandparents and grandchildren to be together. And thank God this was before cell phones, so that grandparents came and no adult child was allowed to come. And they had the grandchildren with them from Friday through Sunday. And we provided a bus from Chicago area so the grandparents didn't have to drive and they could be on the bus with their grandchildren. And they were able to swim together, rowboat together, just sit under a tree and read a book together. And Grandma didn't have to do any cooking. All meals were prepared. And it was just very special, precious time. And we've had families that have come back 10, 12 years. And the age range was usually 4 through 13, 14 years old.
It strikes me that at that time that would have been a fairly unique program. Was it unusual to have programs for grandparents and their grandchildren?
Well, it was in JCC. I don't know about the rest of the United States. One psychiatrist, I read his book to understand, he began to understand that when a grandparent brought a child to his session when they were working together, the grandparent was a very influential person in the child's life. So he created a week at some camp on the East where grandparents and grandchildren were together. So that was before, it was after I did mine. So he found that very helpful.
So sort of you were on the cutting edge.
I was on the cutting edge.
Okay. And when did you retire?
Retired in 1997.
Okay.
16 years ago.
All right. And then this idea for a book about grandparenting came to mind. What was the impetus, or there were probably a number of reasons why you decided to write the book?
I would pick up my granddaughter Katie from school, and I would always ask her that question everybody asks. So Katie, my sweetheart, how is school? And she took her backpack off her back and she went like this. Grandpa, I'm more than just a student. And I said, holy cow, she was more than just a student. She was 13 years old. What was her world like? What was her world of music, TV? What was she reading for fun? What were her friends like? And that gave me an idea that how much do grandparents really know about their grandchildren's world other than, so how's school, sweetheart? And through all my research, I really found that grandparents really matter. And that's a thing that I talk about all the time. You really matter in your grandchildren's life. So I began to explore her world, and then I talked to other grandparents, and that's how I got the idea for the book.
You have a wonderful quote that you use in your book, and also when we had our conversation earlier about comparing a grandparent to a library.
When in storytelling, when I do my family meetings, I also included stories. My 4-year-old, when he was 4-year-old grandchild, we were telling stories. He said, Grandpa, I have a story. And I said, okay, what is it, Aiden? He said, I had a nightmare last night. My son is a psychiatrist and his wife is a psychiatrist. I noticed them writing down what is the nightmare that he had. So that when a grandparent dies, the library burns to the ground. So I encourage grandparents and the whole family to tell stories about their life. And I don't like scrapbooks. I like family books, so that each year these stories and pictures can go into a volume. And volume 1 is 2014, and everybody gets a copy of that volume. So over the years, you have a number of volumes of the family's life, and you can share that.
Maybe it would be nice, if you're comfortable, to just tell us a little about your own family, your own children and grandchildren, so we get a sense of where you're coming from.
I have 6 grandchildren, age 11 now through 31. My 30-year-old grandson, Ethan, just became ordained as a conservative rabbi and has a job at the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York. My 30-year-old granddaughter is a wild animal manager and trainer and works for a ranch that rents animals to TV and commercials, and she's a specialist in getting rattlesnakes out of settings where they're going to shoot a film or a TV or a commercial. She wears all the proper clothing and stuff like that. Another grandson just graduated from Vassar College, and he wants to get a doctor's degree in conflict management and management of conflict in the world. Another one is going to start high school, and that's...
So you had quite a...
Katie is in Spain now.
Okay. Quite inspiration for you to have all those grandchildren and interact with them. I guess what the audience might be thinking is, well, what was your experience like as a grandchild?
My father's parents passed away when I was very young, and my mother's mother and dad, they were alive for a while, and they were in the shoe business, and I worked in the shoes, dusting boxes and eventually selling. And my uncle, once I saw him, when a shoe had a little nick in, he would give $1 off. So I was selling a Florsheim shoe to a guy, and there was a little nick, so I said, and I'll give you $1 off. My uncle said, what the heck did you do? You should ask me before you do that. So that was my early experience with my own grandparents.
Okay, so not quite as enriching as the ones that you have.
No, that wasn't. No.
Okay. Now, I guess the thing that struck me the most when I read your book, even before I read your book, is the idea that you advocate, and that is that, grandparenting isn't, it's certainly biological and natural, it just happens in a way, but you're talking about consciously being a grandparent, to really think about the way in which you grandparent. How did you come up with that idea?
When I talk with grandparents, they say to me, I wonder what my legacy is going to be. And I say to them, don't die until you're dead. Develop living legacies. And we have the 3 jars, which I'll talk about. We'll have I created the Witkovsky Living Legacy Foundation, and it's a way of teaching values. And one of my chapters in the book deal with values. And there are about 20 different values I ask grandparents to consider what's most important, least important. And with each value, there's a list of activities so that you can take the value and live the value while you're still alive.
Yeah, and when people look at your book, read your book, and as a former teacher, it struck me what you said, that there really are sort of worksheets that help guide you at the end of a chapter, as you would find in a lot of educational books. You read something, and then you're asked either to show that you understand it or to reflect on it and go further, and your worksheets offer those opportunities, which I think is unique and very interesting. Let's take a look at some of the major components of your book, all right? And again, the first thing that struck me is, once again, the idea that you're looking at it as a teaching and learning activity. I think you mentioned that a lot of grandparents say, well, we should open our wallets and keep our mouth shut. But you're saying something very different, right, Jerry?
Yes, I think that when I talk about learning and teaching, as I did about learning and teaching in the agency I ran, was that what is the opportunities for learning and teaching in the family? Not just the grandparents talking down to the family, but teaching each other, from the 4-year-old to the 11-year-old, and how do we learn from each other? So in the book, there are 50 letters from grandchildren. I asked these people to write a book. What did you learn from your grandparents? And the people I asked, no one ever asks that. What did I learn from my grandparents? So that I love the letters in the book, because even my own 6 grandchildren wrote in the book. And so that, what have we learned? What do we teach? That's critical to me. As an educator, you could understand that. What is the lesson plan that you create to teach a value or teach an idea?
And as you also said, that grandparents learn a great deal from their grandchildren.
Yes.
I mean, the whole thing with technology is kind of fascinating, how grandparents kind of pick up on technology through their grandchildren, but also different perspectives. You mentioned your family. People have different views about politics and movies and so forth, and obviously to have that exchange with your grandchildren must be very rewarding, very exciting.
It is. I call each of my grandchild every Sunday or whenever they say now's the time to call. I do not text because I want to hear the voice. I want to hear the happiness, the sadness. I just talked to my grandson, the rabbi, and he said he's been there 3 weeks, and he said, there's some stresses that I go through, and there's lots of joys. So, Ethan, what are the stresses you're going through? Well, then he told me some of the stresses he's going through, and we've chatted back and forth on it. So I'm not a text person. The chapter in the book that deals with technology, Skyping and all that, I got a lot of help from other people to help me write that.
And don't you call the telephone calls telephone hugs?
I do. I want a hug from them on the phone, and I want to give the hug. I did that when I ran my agency as well. I would call staff. I did not do emails if I could avoid that. But I wanted to just call and say, yeah, how's it going? And I would ask them to give me a telephone hug because I had stresses as well. So that's what I created, the affection for each other.
Right.
But I also said to my staff, you can't necessarily be best friends with your staff, but you can be friendly and kind and warm and wonderful. But stay away from being best friends, because that gets confusing. Because best friendship to me is a love relationship.
Yeah, and we can talk about that more when we talk a little bit more about the technology. I was also struck that even though the book is about grandparents and their grandchildren, you have a significant chapter about relationship between the grandparent and the adult child or the adult children. And you talk about, you give a number of reasons, and you mentioned the term forgiveness and the term second chance. What did you mean by that?
Well, the research I did on forgiveness, what I meant by that is that when you keep anger or a grudge in yourself, it is corrosive. It just eats away at you. And I wanted people to understand that you can ask for forgiveness and you can give forgiveness. And when there is family life is complicated as all get out. We all know that. So how do you deal with those issues that you're concerned about early? And one of the researchers said the best way of dealing with that is to write a letter of asking forgiveness or giving forgiveness. And I wanted that to be part of the culture in the family, that you don't let the anger and the hostility and the grudges just keep on going year after year or month after month. Deal with it early while the issue is still there.
And pragmatically, you also say that the adult child, I think you used the term gatekeeper, is the gatekeeper to the grandchild.
The grandchildren are not our children. They're your son and daughters and son-in-law and daughter-in-law's children. And they can say, I'm going to shut down the relationship with grandma and grandpa. Now, there are laws like that when people get divorced and they say, you cannot see your grandchildren ever again.
Right.
Well, each state has their own laws to protect the grandparents and the grandchild and that kind of thing. But their job is to raise the kids. Now, how do you become partners with them in doing that? That's the fun and that's the excitement.
And you also give some, I think, a very practical suggestion. You use the term TLC, but you use it to mean tender, loving communication.
That's right.
And could you give an example of, what not to say to your adult child and how to phrase it in a better way?
What not to say to your adult child is, you did a terrible thing by letting that kid drive that motorcycle.
And better to say,
oh, can I ride on the back of the motorcycle too? I say that because I have a son and a daughter-in-law that have motorcycles, and they have their adult children, not their adult children, their children ride on the motorcycles, which every time I hear that, it goes, yes.
But you have to know when to hold your tongue.
Bite your tongue.
Yeah, bite your tongue. Okay, let's talk a little bit about something you brought up earlier, and that is the family values. And these three jars, I think, are a good way maybe to get into that. While we can focus on the jars, could you perhaps explain a little bit what you did with your grandkids in this, with the three jars?
Yes. My granddaughter was bat mitzvahed, and you always give a gift. So I suggested I wanted to teach values at that time.
You say leave values, not only valuables, right?
When people ask about living legacy, I say you do the legacy while you're alive. And so by these three jars, I taught charity, and that there are tasks related to these.
Let's identify the three jars.
There is charity, saving, and spending.
So what I'm going to spend, which most kids, that comes to mind immediately. Well, I got some money, I could spend it, but you also have a savings jar and a charity jar.
Well, the task related to charity is, how do I teach kindness? And kindness for a child can be how you treat your friends, how you treat your family, your dog, your pets, whatever. But I wanted to, that's a task that a child has to learn.
So then, let's say you give your grandchild $10.
Well, what I did was give my granddaughter $15,
okay.
So she could have $5 in each jar. And in the jar in spending, I wanted her to understand that your happiness, that you're responsible for your own happiness. So that you put the money in the spending jar, and how do you decide how you're going to spend that money? But you're responsible for your own happiness. In the savings jar, I wanted to teach the task of visioning. What's the future? What are you going to save for? So those are the three tasks that the jars represent. Of course, she always wanted to spend all the money, but she realized that she could not. And then when she would go with her mother, and she would forget to take money along for shopping, she would always pay her mother back. So that she's learning that when you borrow money, you have a responsibility to pay it back as well. So those are the values I try to teach through the three jars.
And the kids were pretty good about accepting this, the idea of three?
Well, in the book is a letter from Marita that talks about what I taught her through the three jars. She writes it as, you taught me how to manage my money. So that's what, and now that she graduated grammar school, her high school present was $25 a year. So it's not just once, I just give it for a full year, so that she received a check in the mail, or she received cash in the mail for each month for a year.
Okay. And so it teaches them about others as well as managing money for themselves.
Yes, and that teaches the sense of independence. When you have your own money, what is the independence you feel with that? And then it also teaches interdependence. If my little brother wants to borrow money, do I loan him the money and all that kind of stuff? So How do you teach those concepts, those values?
One of the things that was, to me, the most innovative, and I know you yourself said that your own family members maybe had different views, was the idea of a formal family meeting. Can you explain what that is?
It's a family meeting that I started when the kids were very young, and we would sit around the table and I would say, let's talk. We get together every Thanksgiving and every Passover, and we would have these meetings, and we would tell stories, what went on in our life, and then we would have an agenda of what the issues are. After my wife
Now, when you say, I'm sorry, because the audience, I want to make sure they understand. So a written agenda planned ahead of time?
Yes, they would send me what they'd like to talk about. And when the grandkids were young, they said, Grandpa, do we have to sit around this table? And they would roll their eyes, oh, there goes Grandpa again. And I said, well, you don't have to sit here. You can leave if you wish. And they would go to the nearest room with the door open so they could hear all the conversation. And I could hear them giggling. But it's really, it's the opportunity to, when my wife passed away, I had a sheet and I said, can we guarantee that no family member would ever, no child in this family would not be able to go to college or to trade school? Can we all agree on that? Can we agree that...
You're talking about the cousins, so you're talking about extended family caring for each other.
That's right.
Okay.
That was that's the family meetings. I created another thing for the cousins and siblings, which is the Living Legacy Foundation. We'll get to that later. So that, can we agree that no person in our family would ever live in poverty? Can we agree that no person who needs psychiatric help would ever not be able to have it because they couldn't afford it? So there's a series of values that I wanted my family to consider. And we had that discussion. We still have it today around what's going on, how can we help with one another. And we're all over the place. My daughter's in California, my son in Madison. The grandkids are all over. And how do we stay connected to each other?
So the formal meetings probably are somewhat infrequent because of the kids are all over the place now?
The formal meetings are twice a year,
okay.
And we have that. And then we email. I have each email address of my grandchildren, so that when I want to send something out, I just send it to the whole family.
Okay. Let's because we don't have a lot of time. Again, this Living Legacy Foundation is fascinating. Could you go into that?
I created the Living Legacy Foundation. It's not a legal, I never hired lawyers to create the foundation, but I call it that. And I wanted my grandchildren, the sibs and the cousins, to stay connected so that they could apply for funding for something special, not